Hello, we are back with another episode of Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Juliet. Today, we are connecting the dots from Earth to the celestial bodies. We ask, who looked at the stars first? You might be thinking Galileo, but what if we told you it was the Turkana people circa 300 BC? Africa's ancestors looked upwards, not merely in wonder, but with purpose, tying stellar patterns to planting, navigation, time, and ritual itself. The celestial naming and mapping were both practical and philosophical, deeply embedded in life. Today, science validates many of those insights, revealing that indigenous astronomy was far from folklore. It was early astrophysics. Today, we're joined by an astronomer who explore what our ancestors knew, where we lost the thread, and how astronomy quietly shows up in everyday life. By the end, we hope you'll remember to look up more often. And with me today in studio is none other than Lekshmi Rajagopal, who leads the astronomy department at the Turkana Basin Institute, and in addition, is currently pursuing her PhD candidature and part-time lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Lakshmi is guided by the strong belief in the role science education plays in the community, that opportunities for research and well-thought-out curricula are the pillars for good education system. She's particularly interested in how cultural astronomy practices connect communities to the skies. We're very, very excited to have you on the podcast with us today. Lakshmi, karibu sana.
Thank you, Asanti. I'm very happy to be here to talk about astronomy, to have more people just listen and rediscover their connections with astronomy.
Yeah. And let's talk astronomy and astrophysics, which
Mhm.
I was like, what are these words? What do they mean? Are they any different? What are the science disciplines? And how does a person become an astronomer? I.e., what is your path?
Mm. So, really, the pillar of astronomy is physics, as most sciences are rooted in physics, right? And that, like, fundamental logic of how the universe or the natural world around us moves. And so, astronomy is the application of physics in space. And so, we look at fundamental physics concepts, motion of things, the way that fundamental particles move, quantum mechanics, and things like that, and how these rules or these laws apply to celestial bodies. And we try to take, our observational capacities have improved like drastically over however many decades that we've started observing the skies, from just visual observations like naked eye observations to the first telescopes that are purely in the visual wavelength, to now we can do radio observations. We can detect radio waves, we can do gamma rays, we can do x-rays. We have telescopes. There's a telescope that's on like a plane, and so as it flies, there's like a latch that opens, and I don't know if it's still in operation, but like it's to get above the atmosphere.
Mhm.
But basically our the things that we can observe from the universe, we've like expanded those horizons so much. And like I was saying about gravitational waves, that's now a new thing that we can detect, that's not electromagnetic radiation, and that allows us to see further back in time in the universe. And so it's the detection of these things, the ability to start to map our universe, because really, like, all human knowledge is about understanding like what we like, where we come from, what we're doing, like fundamental philosophy even. And so astronomy is the application of these things in space and in celestial bodies, and also to look back then on the earth and formation of the earth and formation of our solar system, and like where is this going, or like we can look at other solar systems and say that we can start to track the fate of our own systems.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but at the same time, astronomy is also, like I said, in a philosophical sense, something that allows you to think about your own existence, and like we said, cultural practices that communities have had. And yeah. Okay.
And Lakshmi, just taking you back, how did you end up becoming an astronomer?
Okay, so
What inspired
I
you?
my dad was a math teacher,
Yeah.
and so for me, like, I have like the very cliche, I have always wanted to be in space science. That's what I knew it as when I was young. And we have all these like books with really great animations, and I think the first thing I remember reading was something about like time, and this concept of like, yeah, time T equals 0 is at the point of the Big Bang. So they say that like, yeah, all like you don't even think about time before that. But that's something so like counterintuitive for us to think about, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was like in year 4, year 5 when I'm reading something like that. And your brain just starts to think like it's even a philosophical sort of trying to understand, right?
Yeah.
But I you know, so I really did enjoy physics. I was okay at math, and no one in my family wanted me to go into astrophysics because it's what kind of a job are you going
Would
to
you
do?
get?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what's
What
the
opportunities would exist
exactly
to
what
you?
industry are you going to exist in, stuff
Right.
like that. And it was like, yeah, like, oh, you're interested in space, go do aerospace engineering. Like that's such a tangible industry, tangible career that you can go into. But I was very adamant about what I wanted to do. And so I did my bachelor's in astronomy. Then I did my master's in physics, but my research was in astrophysics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's a professor, she's called Dr. Lydia Roux, and she works with like the French Institute, I think,
Mm-hmm.
but she's a particle physicist. So the particle's called muons, and so I don't know much about this. I attended a lecture. We brought her to University of Nairobi to give a lecture to
Amazing.
the students,
Yeah.
and so it's something she was explaining there. But you have muons that come from outer space as cosmic rays, and what she does is those muons pass through everything on Earth. They pass through, they come from space and they like are scattered around us. And so they use a muon detector on one side of the Chulu Hills, I
Mm-hmm.
think, because there's like the Mzima Springs.
Mm-hmm.
She was explaining how Mzima Springs is like feeds Mombasa as well for clean water. And so it's like a very significant
Water
source of
source.
water.
Yeah.
And so they were looking at the Chulu Hills to see what its structure is, to see if it's storing water within its like body. And so they put like a detector on one side of it to track how these muons are passing through. And if you have like a high number of them, that means that there's like a lot of water, or I think it's the other way around. I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
basically, you're using cosmic rays to map the internal structures of mountains to inform you whether these
Amazing.
water sources are reliable or not. And so, yeah, practical applications, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about physics. And, even for me, going back to the way we are taught in schools so that we can inspire young people to pick up subjects that might
Mm,
seem technical or difficult. Even for me in high school, I was quite good at physics. I was good in the sciences, but I got to Form 3. And because
mm.
of a teacher, I
You
dropped it
see,
very
you
quickly.
see.
So maybe I would have been an astronomer. Who knows? Not in the
Yeah.
health field. But I want to take you back to, when you spoke to your parents, and it's very unfair. And I always feel like the health side of things, there's certain occupations that get a lot of publicity,
Mm,
and you'd ask kids, what do you want to become? Accountant, doctor, a lawyer, and rarely will people say astronomy. And I wonder, listening to your parents, I wonder, and, given we're African Indian descent, I want to bring in the indigenous knowledge. There's a lot of evidence that indigenous African communities have deep knowledge of astronomy, pre or circa 300 BC.
mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this and also your work at the Turkana Basin Institute and archaeology as well?
Yeah. Let me start, I think, with like my own, cultural beliefs in astronomy. So my mom is very religious. Like, so we're Hindu, and she's, a lot of our practices require like ritualistic things, and yeah, she's very active in like the religious practices. And so she doesn't have like a formal education in science, right? But she knows when like the new moon cycles occur. She knows when there's a full moon. She knows when there's like, yes, Mercury retrograde and stuff like that, which we hear a lot even in social
Yes,
settings, right?
speak. Yeah.
And I don't think it's fair to. So that's something I hear a lot about, like that is very like looked down upon, this thing of like, oh, Mars is in retrograde. Like, what are the like woo woo people saying? But those are like the first ways that we connected to astronomy, right? Like the reason we have all these religious practices around the moon cycles and around like the
The
positions of the
stars.
stars and the
Yeah.
planets is because someone sat and observed these things, right? The way we understood what retrograde was is because we had these catalogs, like of how the planets were moving in the sky over months or stuff like that. Like those records are what allow us to then go back and fit models to it, right? And so in the same way, when I started teaching at the university, I would share this thing about like my own experiences with cultural astronomy through my mom, right? And I would ask like students how things that they know or things that they've seen. And I think that knowledge is lost now because people don't people are not as in touch with, like, you no longer live with your grandparents, so you're not as,
Right.
yeah, in touch with the older people in your in your family. But they exist, like through Turkana Basin Institute. One of the main things, so TBI, the Ilaret campus, is in northern Kenya, like we're right near the Ethiopian border, the east side of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
So the indigenous tribe there, they're called the Dasanach. So one of the things we've tried to do is have conversations with the elders there to understand like
Amazing.
what they do, because Ilaret, one, it has very like dry climate, and so you don't have a lot of cloudy nights. And two, there's very low light pollution. So when I say that, one of the reasons there's low light pollution is because the community there is not connected to the national grid.
Yeah.
And so there is that conversation, right? Like you can't romanticize these things, and while a community does not have access to
Access to
basic human
electricity.
rights, which I
Right.
think, yeah. And there's a lot of other problems in Ilaret, also water issues, food scarcity,
Sanitation.
yeah,
Yeah.
access to medication, especially now with like US aid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know about like the Dark Sky Initiative. There's a Dark Sky International group which works on trying to create these like sort of like what do they call, like reserves,
Mm-hmm.
where it'll be like a protected area, and so you're only allowed to have certain kinds of street lighting.
Yes.
And that
Amazing.
doesn't really mean that you can't have street lighting. It just means that the type of lighting you use should be more like downward facing. It should be of like lower wavelengths, and
Yes.
so that you're not, all that light is not going out into the sky, and so you
Yeah.
preserve that dark
That's
sky
amazing.
as a natural resource. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I want to bring you back to the question on indigenous
Yes.
African communities,
Yeah.
and the deep knowledge for astronomy. It seems that we did, and even when we were saying about science, and even the example of your mom, she's not a scientist, but science by its very nature is that it's knowledge.
Mhm.
The fact that even our own ancestors had the knowledge, or even the understanding of the solar system. What can you tell us in terms of the TBI work
Yeah.
around that and archaeology as well?
Yes. So sorry, that's where I was getting to. The Dasanach, the Dasanach were indigenous to Ilaret.
Yeah.
So they were explaining to us how they're mostly pastoralists and nomads, so they go out with their cattle. And so if they're not, back in the community where you're connected to like time sort of milestones, where like something like a I know now we have phones and stuff, but
Mhm.
even then they're they're not going out with those things, right? And so they say that if they see the morning star in the eastern horizon, then they know that the sun is about to rise. And
Yeah.
so they'll bring their cattle back to the village. And so we know that the morning star Venus only appears either before or after sunset, because Venus is one of the inner planets and it's like in an inner orbit from the Earth. And so it'll always be either towards sunrise, before sunrise, or after sunset. And so they know that, they
Yeah.
connect that. They don't know that that's Venus, so they don't have like a model for, what that's a planet, but they see that that morning star sometimes of the year signify that the sun is about to rise. And they, then there are other cultural beliefs where they see like the shooting stars as being signals of signs of like death, especially to elders,
Yeah.
death of elders.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you see satellites in the sky nowadays. They just look like small stars, but they're moving
Are they
constantly.
visible?
Yeah, they're visible as stars.
Oh, wow.
And so you can see that but they're moving, like in a minute they've moved a distance, right?
Yeah.
And so they have tracked these things. They see those satellites. They explain very
The
clearly.
pastoral
Yes,
communities.
they're
Yeah.
saying that these are not
The usual
shooting stars.
stars.
They're
Yeah.
not that fast. They move much slower,
Slower.
but they are moving.
Oh,
And
wow.
they connect that as well to like incoming enemies and stuff like that. And one of the things we asked them was that, because we know in the past like decade or so, the amount of satellites have increased like by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so we asked, like, in the past, in between your lifetimes, have you seen an increase, and they're like, no. So some things like don't connect, but some things they have like cultural significance. Some things they are using practically for like a physical, physical thing.
Yeah.
But I think that those are the beginnings of astronomy. If you were to then pull that and, like model it or document it and then teach backwards,
Mm-hmm.
it would become modern astrophysics. And that's how modern astrophysics developed, right?
Yeah.
But because it developed, or because like the power hierarchies were Western or from a different sense, that's what we internalize as being like the accepted education, or like, yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, in our research and preparing for this episode, the production lead had a section where, even when we're talking about indigenous knowledge, the Luo community, for example, to your example for the pastoral community in Turkana, for them, the Milky Way was one that they used. In fact, they called it RIP. Maybe I'm not saying it well and correct, but they used it to tell themselves when the dry season was looming or when it was coming. And I want to come back to you as a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. And do you use indigenous knowledge and this, the information you're gathering from the TBI Institute to be able to teach the students? Because this is exciting. And I'm assuming you have thousands of hundreds of students in your class because no?
No, we have astronomy. So the astronomy program was mostly started by Prof. Paul Baki,
Yeah.
who then moved to Technical University of Kenya.
Okay.
He has a paper on some of the Luo practices,
Yes.
on using flora and fauna even to like tell weather, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it was started pre 2016, but
Okay.
so I started teaching 2023, I think, and the groups have been around like between 8 to 19. I think the biggest class was 19. Right now I'm teaching
19 students.
19
Oh,
students.
wow. Is it because it's a new course or?
It's new, but also I think the same thing exists for what jobs are you going to do? Like,
Yeah.
what are you going to do when you graduate out from that? You're paying all the school fees, like, I think that thing is still there. And it's within the physics department. You would much rather your child do like microprocessing or optics, where you can see that there might be like there's like a clear job track, right? Astronomy is still growing in Kenya. And if you were to think about like, what are your opportunities beyond that? If you were to go for a master's, if you to go for a PhD, I think took right now, because they're quite well like supported by DARA, they have some master's programs. But beyond that, yeah, you would apply abroad. And we know how competitive things are getting. We know like even financially how difficult it is to like pay for a master's abroad, right? So I think that's one of the big reasons that people don't choose to pursue astronomy, because we don't have enough of like an ecosystem in Kenya, which I don't think is hard to come up with. Like, we have a planetarium, right? We have all these NGOs who support research in. So that's one of the things that I found when I came and tried to look for like funding for my PhD. All the funding that exists is in health and in climate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to justify, or it's hard to find funding for like physics or astronomy. But I think those are the sustainable things that you should be supporting, because then it like the economy is circular, and you have people who are doing research, who are then bringing in more grants, who are publishing in like really good journals, and then so they get more grants and you can support more students. I think it becomes circular if you support it at the foundation. But the reason we have few students is because it's still not seen as a sustainable career path, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, I want to, maybe it's not even a challenge, but maybe a push. If you look at African communities and how they combine their knowledge of plant and animal behavioral changes together with the night sky knowledge, they use that to be able to predict the weather and the climate. So I find it quite interesting. We're in a climate emergency situation and we're not maximizing on astronomy, astrophysics to literally look at the earth vis-a-vis the sky and what it's telling us in terms of how do we heal planet Earth, for example. And, I wonder in your teaching or even in your publicity, and you're right, health, climate, they get, maybe the biggest share of the money bag. And how do we begin to push astronomy to come through the door? Because it has its own place at the table.
Yes, for sure. And I think there are efforts. So a lot of what I do at TBI is funded by the Development in Africa through Radio Astronomy Fund. So it's like a UK foreign development fund, but it's also in collaboration with the South African government. And I think like whatever has happened in South Africa over the past like I think 10 or so years in astronomy is like what has fed what is happening in Kenya, in Tanzania.
Amazing.
There are all these East African universities that are now introducing astronomy. There are like fully qualified astronomers who are at these universities, who are teaching, who are trying to do more outreach. And I think in South Africa, like a lot of their astronomy like research, their PhD programs, their like student scholarships are all like mostly nationally led. And so there's a push for like, yes, priority for South African students. And I found this when I was applying for something in South Africa where, yes, it is priority for South African students. And I think to some degree that is good.
It's
Like,
fair.
and I think I have to say this that we can come up with all these strategies and we can say that like this is what you have to do, but sometimes you're like building a logic within a system that does not operate in logic at all. We know that money exists, we know that that money is being funneled in different directions, and I have to say this, like we know what the solutions are, we know what
Needs
how
to
we can
happen.
come up with solutions,
Yeah.
but as long as you're saying all this within a system of that does not follow logic, like we're just going in a circular path.
Yeah.
And I think we find this like it can be very discouraging. You try and you can do these like single point interventions, but if there is no systemic support, like I don't think things will, yeah, I don't think,
Things will
yeah.
change. I mean, and as much as you call to the reality of things, this is quite unfortunate. I do feel like there's a lot of positive stuff that has happened, and even in our discussions with you off air, we talked about things like the Space Society for Kenya, the Traveling Telescope, and some of the push that they're trying to do, because I think the increased awareness of the science discipline and also building that capacity, even from the young kids. I mean, what could you say about people who are taking the bull,
Yeah, for
the
sure.
horns by the bull by the horns? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think even the students that are graduating out from University of Nairobi, in every year group, you have a few students or a group of them who have started something new. There was a CanSat group that did a startup where they were going out to schools and teaching high school students how to build like small kind of satellites that you can. I don't know if they were launching them, but basically teaching them how to code them. And so they received a lot of grant funding. It was started by someone I forget his name. He's Billy. I don't know his last name, but he graduated like 2 years ago. And so, like I said, the Space Society of Kenya was started by Bramuel, who also graduated from University of Nairobi. And Space Society of Kenya is supposed to be just like a public forum for young kids, for high school students, for people even further on in their careers, right? And I think, young Kenyan students are so motivated. They have so much initiative, and I think that's what we need to be supporting. Like you said, there's the planetarium. Like, do we know that there is a Kenyan planetarium, right?
News to us when
Yeah.
we discovered it.
And,
Yeah.
people have all these like social desires. Like people do want to go out and be in public spaces and learn new things. And so I think, yeah, Nairobi Planetarium, Space Society of Kenya. And then at like the educational level, like I said, DARA, the main goal of DARA is, to bring more African students into astronomy. And they have what they do with TBI is they run these like field schools in our campus because there's a telescope up there that they brought in as well. And so it's 20 students in each cohort from different African countries. They come there, they spend 2 weeks doing observations,
In
doing
Turkana.
in
Oh, wow.
so technically it's Marsabit because it's east side of the lake.
Yeah.
And
In
yeah,
northern Kenya.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But
It's amazing.
yeah, 2 weeks doing analysis. And these are students from South Africa, from Mozambique, from everywhere, and Kenyan students as well, right? And then they do a second part of the training in South Africa. And then the same fund has like a few master scholarships that these students can apply for. So they're going to do fully funded master's programs in astronomy in the UK. And that already puts them in a track to go forward in like that astronomy career. And so I think that's one of the biggest players. Dara has been one of the biggest like influences in bringing astronomy. Even Prof. Baki at Took works like very closely with Dara. And so, yeah.
You've mentioned the 20 students. So can anyone apply for this, or is it specific for people already doing a bachelor's in
Yeah, for
astronomy?
DARA, it has to be, you have to have graduated from an bachelor's. It doesn't have to be in astronomy. The
Yeah.
point is, if you've done anything in STEM, even there were some telecommunications engineering students, people who've come out of physics, optics, things
Mhm.
like that. As long as you've come out from like a STEM degree and you have an interest in astronomy, the point is to take those skills and show you that you can apply it in this field. There is like a possibility to now explore astronomy. So for Kenyan students, the school is in July, I think,
Mhm.
and so like the applications start out in maybe 2 months before that. But Prof. Baki at Tuk is the one who like sends out those applications. But they can, if anyone hearing this has interest, they can reach out to me
Okay.
on my email.
Okay, and we're obviously going to tag you when the post goes live. You mentioned the telescope in northern Kenya. How
Yeah,
powerful is it?
yeah.
And I'm just wondering, we had we welcomed question from our viewers
Mhm.
ahead of this podcast, and one of the questions was, what does a Kenyan space landscape look like?
Yes.
So how
Okay.
powerful is a telescope, and then what
Yeah.
does a space?
So it's a 40 centimeter telescope. It's not in any sense like a research grade telescope. It's mostly for training. But so it was brought in, but it was brought in to do real scientific observation. The University of Edinburgh were observing the DART collision, which is where NASA sent out like a small satellite to shift the path of like an asteroid.
Okay,
So the asteroid was not coming towards us, but it was like a test to see
to
that
see
do
if
we
it
have the
can.
capabilities? Yeah.
Wow,
And so
did we?
there was a small deviation in its track,
Yeah.
and that collision was visible. So the collision, it just becomes brighter, and so that was visible mostly from Eastern Africa. So it's the planetary department at the University of Edinburgh. They brought in that telescope, they did the observation, and then it stayed there.
Mhm.
And so
Oh, that's great in terms of infrastructure
yes,
building.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so they've opened it up, and that's the reason Dara came into TBI, because that telescope was there.
Existed.
And we see that there's clear skies, there's like an opportunity, there's the infrastructure there, there's dorms, there's in like you said, in the middle of, all this desert kind of environment, there's accommodation, there is, the
Amazing.
infrastructure to support people coming to do education and research. Um,
Our
Sorry,
space.
what was your question?
And then the Kenyan space
Yeah,
landscape, what does
yeah.
it look
So,
like?
so like I said, this kind of training, definitely Dara is a big player in that. But we have the Kenya Space Agency. I'm sorry I haven't mentioned that up
Yeah.
till now, but yeah, the Kenya Space Agency, I think they are doing a lot. They do have like a outreach branch of it, I think, like education and outreach.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you remember, there was last year sometime, there was like the planetary alignment, where they were saying that there was like a lot of news articles that went out about you could see a lot of the planets, they were visible in the sky on the same night.
Yeah.
And
Could we see
so
it from Nairobi, urban
probably not
city?
from Nairobi.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think around like September, well, if we didn't have rains, I think it was visible. But they were going out. They did a lot of like news segments. Like I
Mm-hmm.
saw them even on Citizen. I don't know. Like, so Harold is one of the people who works at KSA. He's an astronomer. He also graduated from University of Nairobi.
Yeah.
And so he was doing like more like public outreach, explaining what this phenomenon is, how you can see it. And I think they had set up small telescopes where you could go and observe these things. But I think some of Kenya Space Agency's main goals are also in space, which I realize that when people say space, they don't mean astronomy, they mean like space systems. They mean like launching satellites, like
Yeah.
Earth observation. So Kenya Space Agency launched a satellite 2 years ago, I think,
Yes, I
Taifa 1.
remember this one.
Yeah, and one of the things is that I don't know who has access to that data or if it's being
Collected.
collected. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Why did
yeah.
we launch a satellite?
It was supposed to be for Earth observation. It was
Okay.
supposed to be that, you can look at like things like cloud cover, look at the way you can, I don't know, like maps of the land, and then you can use that to inform crop rotation or stuff like that. Yeah,
Agriculture.
but
Yeah.
yeah, like it's supposed to be for Earth observation. But again, that's one of the things, so many satellites exist.
Yeah.
And I think we should be talking about doing those kinds of collaborations, like instead of, are we continuously going to be doing things to be the first to do something,
Mm-hmm.
and we're contributing to all this waste in space, Elon Musk, whatever. And so I think, yeah, if you think like a scientist, then you think about collaboration and sustainability, and if data is available, then you don't need more infrastructure. You just need better ways of analyzing it, or better, more creative ways of using that data, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I wonder what three ways are African scientists contributing to astronomy now that we do have the tools and maybe even the technical know-how, to utilize those tools, and also understanding, including our indigenous knowledge. Now
Yes.
that's Paul uh,
Baki.
Bucky,
Yeah.
I was about to say Becky.
Yeah.
Paul Bucky has
Yeah.
written a lot of papers on this.
Yes. So I think this is a good time to start by saying the African Astronomical Society annual conference is going on right now in
Oh,
Botswana.
yeah.
And so
Amazing.
it's all African scientists from so many places are coming there to present their own research in all areas of astrophysics, and also in education initiatives. So Goretti from TBI, from our department, is there now presenting some of the work we did for teacher training at Illoret. And Wesley, who's one of the other people in our department, was presenting the work that they did on site testing. So they were looking at the Illoret site and how suitable it is for astronomical observations. Dr. Willis, who is at Took, he is a fully qualified astrophysicist. He's in radio physics. He helps with the Dara schools. He does the teaching. He does his own novel research. I think he does some observations at in South Africa still. There's Dr. Naftali, who is at Kenyatta University, who teaches astrophysics, who also comes for the Dara schools. And so, African scientists are doing what all scientists do. They are applying for grants, they're doing their research, they're mentoring students, they're working within departments. So at Meru University, Meru University is the other one I know where there is an astronomy presence. I forget the prof's name, but he's also, I think, radio astrophysicist, and he supervises students. Some of his students have come through Dara. They've then gone on to do master's programs in the UK, in South Africa. So yeah, African astrophysicists are doing what all other astrophysicists do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is contributing to the body of knowledge
Yes.
that exists and
Exactly.
increasing. What are some of the coolest things that you've seen from some of these African scientists in terms of just a cool discovery or cool contribution, and even in science communication? Who's doing a comic?
Yeah, yeah. Let me start by saying, I don't know if you know Anne Jerry, but uh, she's an astrophysicist. She went through Dara. She was doing a postdoc, I think, at Newcastle. And she started something called Emeja, which is Emicia, I don't know, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Emeja, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be looking at the girl students in going from KCPE to KCSE, obviously in the past system, and trying to retain those students, to have a high number of girls going from primary education to secondary education. So they used astronomy as a tool to try to keep those girl students interested. So they did these workshops where they would go, I think, 2 to 3 days or a week, and they would go into these schools outside of Nairobi as well, and host workshops, like give these students mentors that they could keep in touch with and could track their progress. And the purpose was to try to keep these students interested, and have them like go on to high school. And so I remember when I met with her, one of the things, because they got a lot of funding, they've presented it in a lot of places. I think it's been going on for more than 3 or 4 years now. And so one of the things she said was like, yeah, right now it's astronomy. I'm using astronomy to try to keep students in school, but it's not like I'm committed to not it's not that it has to be astronomy is one of the tools we can use to have them interested, right? And I think that's one of the things, like,
Amazing.
if you science education, things like physics education, it's building a logic, which doesn't mean that you then have to go into physics or you have to go into astronomy, but you can use that as a tool for like skill building, for logic building, which you can then go and apply in any field, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the cool things that I saw as I looked around. And then in terms of science, I think there is so much going on. I know that there was one of the postdocs that came for Dara. He's called Isaac from Tuk,
Yeah.
and he works on active galactic nuclei. I could be wrong if he does quasars, but he observed a flare during his PhD, I think,
Yeah.
and then it was like a novel discovery, and so he got it published, and I think that was cool.
That's amazing. I hope he won an award for that as well.
I don't know, but I think the publication was a big
Deal.
award for him. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
there was another thing where in South Africa, they have a big planetarium there,
yeah,
and they were using, so Sally McFarlane, so she came for Dara once as well. And so this is where I meet all these people.
yeah,
And I think that's something really good that I've got from Dara, which is just to meet all these astronomers who are doing so many different things. But just quickly, they have a planetarium, and they use that planetarium to, okay, I don't know if it is her work or she was describing something that happened before, but they brought in like doves and a certain kind of birds, and they used it to like present the stars, the
mm-hmm.
star formation and the star motions, to understand how these birds were navigating at night. And so they would like remove some of the brightest stars to see like, is this what's helping them? And then you realize like, no, they still can tell exactly where north is. And they realized that they were using the motion of the stars, because all stars go around the North Pole.
Yeah,
And so you can see that there's that whatever circular motion or like arc motion, and that's what they were using. So even when you took away like recognizable patterns or like the very bright sky stars,
yeah.
they were still able to tell that north, right? And yeah, I think that was a really cool thing.
That's just amazing. And I mean, I can't fail to shout out also to our good friend Susan Murabana, who we talked about traveling telescope. And what was the example she talked about in terms of tourism? I can't remember. What did she call it?
About astrotourism?
Yes,
Yeah,
astrotourism. Yes.
Yeah, Traveling Telescope, I think, has been the most active in astronomy in Kenya for so long, because they have really done well in astrotourism. And these are sky safaris. You take people outside of Nairobi, be able to see the sky. And then they have the planetarium, of course. And I think, like she was describing, they use a lot of what they can, benefit from as a business to then go and do outreach. As a service, public schools are getting more people just to look through a telescope, like she was saying. And I think I remember, reading before I met her, I remember reading that she had done uh, some sort of initiative to try to get astronomy in the national curriculum. And I think those are one of the things that would bring students more, into. And I don't know, do people know that there's a bachelor's of astronomy at the University of Nairobi that you
I
can
mean, the
apply for?
first I've ever heard of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And it's a rare thing to have a bachelor's that is in astronomy and not in physics with a few units. And so I think that's something we should be expanding on.
Lakshmi, we're running out of time,
Yes,
but a
okay.
myth and misconception that you've heard about astronomy that really drives you mad.
A myth or a misconception?
Yeah, if any. I mean, if there's none, that's
Oh,
fine
yes.
also. No pressure.
No, I think just this thing of that, astronomy is a resource heavy science, or it's like something that you can only do in certain parts of the world. I think, I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's what I'd say. Like, we all have an access to science as long as you have a logic in your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
No, yeah, I don't have.
I mean, I'm taking away a couple of things from our discussion today, and I hope even our viewers, our listeners, and people who subscribe to the podcast also do. That one, there's a planetarium in Kenya that I should probably be taking all these production team members and my kids to. Maybe even check out the Space Society of Kenya, as you've mentioned. That sounds very exciting. I'm very happy to hear that that's been started. And of course, Susan Murabana's traveling telescope and the astrotourism. I think that's very, very cool. I'm hoping the next one will be going to Lamu, because I think we've heard that Lamu has a space telescope or space station.
Is it the Malindi one?
Is it Malindi?
I don't know if you're thinking about the Italian one. I don't know if there's one in
Is it
Lamu.
open to the public?
No, I think they do launches. I don't know if it's
Launches of what? Satellite?
Yeah, and I don't know much about that
Yeah,
program.
Kenya is setting up space corners that we
Yeah.
need, space station corners that we need to be exploring, and I
Yeah.
think need to be open to the public, right?
Yes, and Malindi, they definitely used to do launches. I think they still
That
do
is
it, but
so
that's what it
cool.
was for. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I'm taking home is also that, astronomy, astrophysics is a really exciting subject. It sounds like it has applications across the board. I love your example about South Africa's planetarium and how they're using the doves. And I think sometimes we're doing a disservice by not including astronomy. Even if we look at climate emergency and what we can do, we don't have enough time. I really wanted to find out about what is the impact on the current wars in the space. Are we affecting our atmosphere, and also just the celestial bodies. But as we close, what would you like to leave our viewers with?
I think, you know, you don't have to do astronomy in an academic setting to incorporate it in your life, because going out and looking at the stars and just looking at the way, like, do you know where the sun rises? Do you know how the stars move along the sky? Like, those are things that you can observe. Like when we have lunar eclipses, when we have certain events happening, like those are things that you can take on as a recreational activity, right? And I think bringing astronomy into the public spaces gives us something to do. It's something like we're eager for things to do. And I think even in a social setting, right, not academically, like you can incorporate astronomy. I think that was one of the things. I remember the JWST, one of the space-based telescopes, like its first light came out when I was in my master's, and I was in New York State in Rochester. I just remember there were so many like public events of, so first light
of
means the
viewing.
first images that they had out, right?
Yeah.
And there was like a live stream from NASA. And so there were just all these public community spaces where people would go to, like, see this like really big thing, which you don't have to be an astronomer to understand that it's such a big thing that we're taking observations of objects that are so far away, or like, so far back in time even. And
Yeah.
then even things like lunar eclipses. So I have to say this.
Yeah.
We did when there was a lunar eclipse, blood moon eclipse last September. So we brought in the high school students from Illiret.
I remember this actually. I
Yeah,
remember looking
last
at the
around
moon.
September, yeah.
Yes.
And so it's a full total lunar eclipse. It becomes red. And so we brought in the students from Illiret High School to TBI to do this observation. We had like a small telescope set up. And we had like a little model we made to explain, like, here's the Earth, Sun, Moon, like these are the motions, this is why this is happening. And they came, we did that observations, and they went back to the community. And they were telling us the next day, the teachers were telling us that when they go back to the community, they have their own practices that connect to the blood
The
moon
blood moon.
eclipse. And so
Yeah.
they were up all night, because I think they have certain, like, I think they
Dances,
make
music.
noises with
Mhm.
the pans and stuff, because they believe it's like an evil, it's an
Oh,
evil phenomenon, so you're like chasing it
the
away.
spirits. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was not something that they didn't know. They knew these eclipses happen. They have connected practices to it, and I think then connecting that with like the scientific model, like this is what it happens to high school students who are, at the right age to start learning these things. I think that was like a perfect connection of all these things that we're trying to do at TBI.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is such a fantastic example, and this is why we do science comms, because you've raised a key point that sometimes we think as scientists that we are imparting knowledge to the
Mm.
community, where sometimes it is that the community is also educating us and challenging the knowledge that we have.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's such a fantastic point.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I am very jealous of the students, and the opportunity, because I was seeing it from the city, and all I could
Yeah.
tell is like the moon's different, but beyond that, no telescope, no
Yeah.
nothing. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, but kudos to you and the team. I'm very excited. We have many reasons to be looking up at the sky in a technological advancement in modern society, where we are all on TikTok and on Instagram, scrolling on our phones. Take a pause, take a moment, look up at the sky, and get inspired by what we see around us. Also, step out a little bit to be able to learn about what are the things that we can tell from our ecosystem. Lakshmi, greatest point that you've made about also our own grandparents, and also tapping into the indigenous knowledge that exists. They have a wealth of knowledge. We as scientists only add on to that knowledge base. Thank you so much, Lakshmi, for joining us on this episode. And thank you for tuning in and sending in some of your questions. I'm very sorry we didn't have enough time, but we'll try and answer them on social media. Keep the conversation going on our socials. Remember to tag us on CTD Pod Africa on all platforms. That's YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Instagram. This episode was brought to you by Silink Global and African Science Communication Collective. And I'd like to thank my production team, Mumboa and Mwema. Thank you very much. As always, stay curious, be bold, and keep asking why.